The sky above Paris darkened as if the heavens themselves were warning of the storm to come. On the horizon, a black tide approached along the Seine. Hundreds of longships, their dragon-headed prows slicing through the mist, cut a terrifying path toward the city. The water itself seemed to boil under the weight of their presence. These were no ordinary raiders. These were Vikings unrelenting, unstoppable, brutal. Their shields glinted in the pale dawn light, axes and swords ready, faces painted with war and hunger. The riverside echoed with the thrum of 1,000 boots on planks, the clang of armor, the guttural cries of men who had known nothing but conquest and blood. Paris had never seen anything like this, and its people would soon understand fear in a way that would never leave them. Inside the city, life went on, oblivious to the gathering shadow. Merchants haggled in narrow cobblestone streets. Children ran through the alleys, laughing. Churches chimed their morning bells, but that calm was ripped apart when scouts ran screaming into the streets. The Northmen are here. Hundreds of ships. The word spread like wildfire. Panic swept through the city. Mothers clutched their children. Guards rushed to the gates, drawing their swords with trembling hands. The city's walls, sturdy though they were, suddenly seemed fragile in the face of the approaching storm. And at the helm of this storm stood Ragnar Lodbrok, the legend, the nightmare, the man whose name alone could send kingdoms into trembling chaos. Today, he would show Paris the full force of Viking fury. The ships reached the riverbank. The Vikings poured onto the shore like a living wave, axes cleaving through doors, shields bashing down gates, fire spreading along the wooden buildings. Paris awoke to terror. Smoke choked the streets. The screams of the innocent mixed with the roar of Viking war cries. Charles the Bold, the king of West Francia, watched from the safety of his palace, his heart pounding as he realized that his defenses were no match for this tide. The walls held for now, but the people inside were paralyzed by fear. Paris was about to learn a lesson in terror that it would never forget. Ragnar moved through the chaos with calculated precision, each step a declaration of dominance. Entire districts burned at his command. Villagers who tried to resist were cut down instantly, their deaths a warning to others. Every strike, every movement was a message. Submit or perish. Charles paced in the throne room, realizing that brute strength alone would not save his city. The Vikings were more than raiders. They were a force of psychological warfare, a nightmare given flesh. And Paris was at the center of it. The first hours of the siege were absolute chaos. Fire leapt from rooftop to rooftop, consuming warehouses and homes alike. Civilians fled through alleys, their terror feeding the Vikings' frenzy. The city guard attempted to organize, but the speed and coordination of the raiders overwhelmed them. Ragnar's men moved in deadly harmony, flanking any resistance, breaking defenses, and ensuring that the fear in Paris grew with every passing minute. The Seine, usually a lifeline for trade and communication, became a barrier that trapped the terrified citizens in the city's burning heart. Ships blocked escape routes, and on the riverbanks, Viking archers rained death from above. Charles the Bold tried to rally his commanders, but indecision had already set in. The king's fear spread through the ranks. Soldiers who had been trained to defend the city found themselves frozen as the Vikings moved like shadows, striking with terrifying efficiency. Each time Paris seemed to organize a counterattack, Ragnar had already anticipated it, redirecting his forces to crush the resistance. Supplies ran low, and the city's morale began to fracture under the relentless pressure. Vikings looted methodically. Valuable goods were stripped from homes, churches, and warehouses. Silver, gold, and fine cloth were piled onto the longships. Each act of plunder was accompanied by fire and slaughter, sending a clear message to anyone who might dare resist. Yet the people of Paris did not surrender entirely. Groups of civilians barricaded themselves in churches and towers, determined to hold out against the invaders. These pockets of resistance slowed the Vikings, but only marginally, as Ragnar's strategic mind ensured that no defense lasted long against the relentless onslaught. The psychological impact of the siege was immense. Smoke, fire, and screaming civilians created an environment where survival became the only thought in the minds of Parisians. Families hid under rubble, mothers shielded children, and soldiers fought desperately to hold sections of the wall. Meanwhile, Ragnar observed from a vantage point, calculating, patient. His eyes scanned the chaos like a predator measuring prey. Nothing escaped him, not a single weakness in the city's defenses, not a single moment of hesitation among the king's advisors. Every act of fear amplified the Vikings' dominance. As days passed, the siege intensified. The city's resources dwindled, food became scarce, water was contaminated, and disease began to spread among the inhabitants. Morale plummeted. Charles realized that the city could not withstand this storm indefinitely. Every attempt to organize a counteroffensive was met with brutal Viking retaliation. The longships allowed Ragnar to shift his forces at will, striking where the city was weakest. Night raids kept the defenders in constant terror. Fires were set strategically, destroying access points and creating panic. Paris had never faced anything remotely similar in scale or ferocity. In the midst of this chaos, Ragnar's leadership shone. He inspired his men not only with promise of plunder, but with fearlessness and precision. His raiders moved with uncanny coordination, overwhelming defenders at every turn. Charles' advisors urged negotiation, but the king hesitated, trapped between pride and fear. The Vikings were not just looting. They were demonstrating that brute force, combined with relentless strategy, could break even the most fortified city.